But what we see in this moment of national remembering is the divided soul of the nation. America has this double consciousness where it imagines itself as a beacon of freedom and as a white republic, and that's in full view in 1876.
You know, and let's move on to the 150th celebration, Eddie, because again, we've had this discussion on the air. I remember just the shocking, again, you talk about forgetfulness, but the shocking statements that Woodrow Wilson would make. Something, you know, Woodrow Wilson, when we were growing up, was always remembered as this great progressive, a guy that was too sort of starry-eyed and too far left to understand why the League of Nations wouldn't work. And but it ended up, though, that Wilson was extraordinarily bigoted even for his time as a president. And as we move 6 years later to the 150th anniversary, the Klan is on the march. Like they're trying to pass bills and making some progress on making the United States a, quote, Nordic nation. You have black Americans who fought and risked their lives in World War I coming home, being excluded from parades. This is what the 150th anniversary of America, the shadows that were cast over that. Talk about 1926.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, it's a really complicated moment. You know, we think of the 1920s as the age of jazz, the Charleston, but it's really the decade of the Klan. We see the massive march of the Klan in Washington, D.C., columns of rows of folk in their white hoods and sheets, as it were. And we know that the Klan played a critical role in passing the Immigration Act of 1920, a regime that many folk today want to go back to, right? But in 1926, you have this celebration of the 150th anniversary of the nation in Philadelphia, echoing 1876. But the Klan was initially approved to hold its annual convention on the grounds of the exposition. Joe, they were going to celebrate the flag and burn crosses at the same time. And this reveals very clearly this divided soul. America is kind of, how can I put this? There's a madness deposited at the heart of the country because it imagines itself as a beacon of freedom and as a white republic. And we see that cycle happening over and over and over again, and we see it very clearly during these milestone anniversaries.
Eddie, congratulations on the book. I was honored to read an early copy some time ago. Got a rave in the New York Times, which includes this line in the review. Eddie writes in one of the most startling opening sentences I've read in some time. That opening sentence, I do not love America and never have, especially now. Now, obviously, you spent a whole book explaining that. There's a lot of real hope in here. Talk to us why, though, you think this moment is so important to trigger this debate about these anniversaries and who we are as a nation.
Because we have white nationalists who have seized control of the country. We have folk who are asserting that the creed, the American creed, I was thinking about the conversation with Ben Rhodes earlier. You have these folk who are appealing to a storybook version of America that's rooted in blood and soil, and that they are engaged in an all-out effort to put people like me in my place. When I wrote that sentence, I remember getting up pacing, and I was thinking about my childhood. My dad, the second African-American hired at the post office in Pascagoula, Mississippi, moved us to the other side of town. And I'm playing with my Tonka truck with my new neighbor, my new friend, and his dad came out and screamed, "Stop playing with that N-word." I had to grab my truck and go into the house. Now, the country, the outside world told me what it thought of me. But my parents put a crown above my head. They had to do the hard work on the inside of our house to tell me, to raise me not to believe what the world said about me. So it's not that I had to learn how to survive the country, right? And so I wrote that sentence to say that I don't love abstractions. I don't love things that are so morally... At some point, and Joe, I know you're going to like this, I think, or you might not like it, but at some point, certain echoes, John, or invocations of American patriotism sound to my ear like a rebel yell. And I brace myself. Instead, I love the people on the ground. I love the idea that every human being should be afforded dignity and standing. And this idea of America, as rooted in blood and soil, gets in the way of that moral virtue, that moral sense of the country, right? And so that sentence, right, was hard to write, but I had to write it.
Yeah, and Gene Robinson, it is, you know, we've often talked about how the arc of history is constantly moving toward justice. But I would say in my lifetime, being born in Atlanta, Georgia, and when Martin Luther King was in Atlanta, Georgia, the same year of I Have a Dream speech, and when I was one, and two, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And I grew up in the New South. I've always said this, and, especially white liberals in the Northeast don't believe it. But Eddie and I have talked about this. I didn't hear the N-word growing up in public schools. I just didn't, because I was the first class in 1969 that was integrated in rural Mississippi. So the world I grew up in, and then as I move through life, we all know there's racism. We all know there's problems. Barack Obama's elected president. And you're thinking we're moving forward. But what Eddie's book talks about is for all of those gains, for all of those victories, we have had this nasty habit of resetting as a nation. We did it after the Civil War. We did it after Reconstruction. We did it time and time again. And we're in one of these nasty resets right now. And I just got to say, Gene, for people that say, oh, don't talk about that, just say America's great. I mean, spiritually, every great story is about somebody who has fallen. Peter, who rejected Jesus 3 times the night he died, the night before he died, and then was the rock upon which Jesus built his church. We have to look at the bad. We have to look at the ugly to understand where we can go and why it will be so great when we finally move toward being that more perfect union.
Well, yeah, Joe, if you want to believe in America, then believe in the struggle. Believe in the struggle against the blood and soil white nationalist view of this country. As you know, I just finished a book, that looks at 200 years of history through the lens of my family. And what I saw so clearly was these repeated times when the nation is essentially forced to move closer to that vision of Thomas Jefferson's vision: all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with unalienable rights, and gains ground, and then it's taken back, and it is taken back brutally, often a deadly manner, and yet the struggle continues, and it gathers strength again, and it tries again to push the nation forward. We seem condemned to repeat the past, not once, not twice, but again and again and again. And we're clearly right now in one of those moments, one of those taking back moments. It's not a coincidence that Barack Obama is followed immediately by Donald Trump. Not a coincidence.